My beloved child, stop for a moment, because the letter you are about to hear is not the kind of letter someone writes when they have nothing left to say. It is the kind of letter someone writes after carrying words in their heart for far too long, after rewriting the same sentence again and again, after staring at a blank page because they know that once the truth is written down, there is no going back to the way things were before. Your soulmate has written something for you, and hidden inside those words is a revelation that could completely change the way you understand the silence between you. Stay with me for a moment, because the first line of this letter is going to make you wonder how they could possibly know exactly what has been happening inside your heart. Imagine opening an envelope and seeing your name written in handwriting you would recognize instantly. Your heart pauses. Your hands become still. You already know who it is from, but you are not prepared for what comes next. The letter begins, "I don't know if you will ever understand why I stayed silent, but I need you to know that my silence was never the absence of love." Read that sentence again in your heart. They are not writing to impress you. They are writing because something inside them has finally become impossible to ignore. They admit that there were moments when they wanted to reach out but stopped themselves. There were nights when they almost sent a message, mornings when your name crossed their mind before anything else, and ordinary moments that suddenly reminded them of you. But the most surprising part is still hidden deeper inside the letter. They reveal that something recently happened that made them look at your connection differently. One simple moment brought back memories they thought they had already moved beyond. It could have been a song, a familiar place, a conversation, a photograph, or even a completely ordinary moment that suddenly carried your presence. And when that memory returned, they realized something they had been trying not to admit: they never truly stopped caring. As this unfolds, clarity will come. The reason this letter feels so powerful is not simply because they miss you. It is because they are finally beginning to understand what your presence meant in their life. They write, "I kept telling myself that time would make me forget, but time only made me realize what I had taken for granted." Those words change everything. Because now the question becomes, what exactly did they realize? Why are they writing now? And why does the final section of this letter contain a piece of news they have never shared with you before? Keep listening, because the answer is closer than you think. The next page of the letter becomes even more emotional. Their handwriting seems slower, as if every sentence requires courage. They write, "There is something I should have told you a long time ago. I thought keeping it to myself would make things easier, but it only made the distance between us heavier." This is where the story takes a surprising turn. They confess that there was a moment when they nearly told you everything, but something made them hold back. Not because they had forgotten you. Not because you meant less to them. They were afraid that their words would arrive at the wrong time, that you would misunderstand what they were trying to say, or that opening their heart would change everything before they were ready. But now, they say, they no longer want to hide behind uncertainty. They write that they have been reflecting on the choices they made, the conversations they avoided, and the moments they allowed to pass without saying what they truly felt. Then comes the sentence that makes the entire letter feel different: "I finally understand that some connections do not disappear simply because two people stop speaking." That is the news hidden inside this letter. Something has shifted within them. They are no longer looking at the past only with regret. They are looking at the future with a completely different mindset. They reveal that they have made a personal decision, one that they had been postponing for a long time. They want to stop allowing fear, pride, confusion, or timing to decide what happens next. They want to communicate honestly. They want to clear the air. They want you to know what was real and what was never said. But there is another revelation, and this one is even more unexpected. They write, "You may think I forgot the little things, but I remember more than you realize." Then they mention tiny details you probably never imagined mattered to them. A sentence you once said. A particular expression on your face. A moment when you supported them without asking for anything in return. A memory that seemed ordinary to you but became unforgettable to them. Suddenly, the letter is no longer about a lost connection. It is about the realization that your presence left an imprint they could not erase. Something huge is waiting for you, and it is connected to the final message they have been trying to find the courage to write. Before we reach that message, share this with someone who understands what it feels like to have unfinished words sitting quietly in the heart, and if this story is resonating with you, stay connected because the final revelation brings all of these scattered pieces together. Your soulmate writes one final sentence on this page: "I am finally ready to tell you why I never stopped hoping that one day we would have this conversation." And then the letter continues on to the next page. Now comes the part they almost did not write. The page begins with a pause, as though they stopped writing for several minutes before continuing. "If you are reading this," they say, "then I have decided that honesty is more important than pretending everything is fine." They explain that for a long time they believed the easiest choice was to keep moving forward without looking back. But every attempt to convince themselves that the connection no longer mattered eventually led them back to the same realization. They still had something left to say to you. Then they reveal the news that changes the emotional meaning of the entire letter. They have reached a point in their life where they are ready to make room for a new chapter, but they do not want that chapter to begin with unfinished words from the past. They want closure. Not the kind that means forgetting, but the kind that means finally speaking honestly. They write, "I don't want you to remember me only through the silence. I want you to know what was happening behind it." And then they explain that during the time you thought they were distant, they were actually learning something about themselves. They were learning that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is hidden inside memories, quiet decisions, and the things people are too afraid to say. They admit that they once believed they had to have every answer before reaching out, but now they understand that sometimes the first step is simply being sincere. Then comes the most surprising line of all: "There is a possibility I never allowed myself to believe before, and now I cannot stop thinking about it." What possibility? The letter does not reveal it immediately. Instead, they describe a future conversation where both of you finally sit down without pretending, without rehearsed words, without trying to prove who was right or wrong. They want to talk about what happened, what was misunderstood, what was never expressed, and what could still be understood differently. This is why the letter feels like more than a confession. It is an invitation to clarity. This may resonate as we continue, because perhaps you have also experienced a connection where the hardest part was not losing someone, but never knowing what they truly felt. Your soulmate admits that uncertainty became the biggest weight they carried. And then they write, I have one piece of news that I have been waiting to share, because I knew it would mean something to you. The next sentence is covered by a small pause in the story, but the meaning becomes clear. Something in their circumstances has changed, and that change has given them the confidence to finally speak. They are no longer waiting for a perfect moment. They are choosing an honest one. If these words are touching something inside you, take a second to share this message and subscribe so you do not miss the continuation of this story, because the final page contains the sentence that explains why this letter was written at all. And remember, the most powerful part of a letter is sometimes not what it says first, but what someone finally finds the courage to say last. The final page begins with words that feel almost impossible to ignore. There is one thing I need you to know before you decide what my letter means. Your soulmate explains that they are not asking you to erase the past, forget the difficult moments, or pretend everything happened perfectly. Instead, they want you to know that their feelings were more complicated and more genuine than they ever allowed you to see. Then comes the news they have been building toward from the very beginning. They have made a decision to stop running from the conversation they have postponed for so long. They want to speak. They want to explain. They want to hear you. And most importantly, they want the truth between you to exist outside of assumptions. They write, I cannot promise you exactly what tomorrow will look like, but I can promise that I no longer want silence to speak for me. Those words carry the entire weight of the letter. Because perhaps this was never really about a dramatic reunion or a perfect ending. Perhaps it was about two people finally reaching a point where honesty matters more than uncertainty. They then reveal the sweetest part of the letter. If there is one thing I hope you remember, it is that you mattered to me more than I ever knew how to explain. They thank you for the memories, for the moments when you were there, for the lessons, and even for the distance that forced them to understand themselves more deeply. Then they write one final sentence, and this is the sentence that melts the heart. If life gives us another chance to speak, I do not want to waste it pretending I have nothing to say. The letter ends there. No dramatic demand. No pressure. Just honesty. And suddenly you understand why this message had to reach you. The biggest revelation was not simply that your soulmate remembers you. It was that they finally understand the value of saying what should have been said long ago. Something huge is waiting for you, but sometimes that something huge begins with a single honest conversation. So if you have been wondering whether silence always means the story is over, remember this letter. Sometimes silence is simply a chapter where feelings are being understood before words are finally chosen. And if this message resonated with you, hold on to the feeling rather than the fear. Let the future reveal itself naturally. Because the most beautiful part of this story is not knowing exactly what happens next. It is knowing that somewhere, behind all the silence, there are words that were waiting to be spoken, and now, finally, they have found their way to you. My beloved child, the moment after reading that letter is where everything begins to change. You thought the message had already revealed the most important truth, but there is another layer your soulmate never included in the first few lines. Stay with me for a moment, because the next revelation is connected to something they almost confessed before sending the letter. After writing those final words, they did not immediately send it. They closed the letter, opened it again, read everything from the beginning, and stopped at one particular sentence. That sentence reminded them of the exact moment when they realized they could no longer pretend that your connection meant nothing. They had been carrying a question inside their heart. What if I had spoken sooner? That question kept returning whenever they remembered you. Then something unexpected happened. They came across an old memory connected to you, and instead of feeling only nostalgia, they felt a strange sense of certainty. They realized that what they wanted was not another fantasy about what could have been. They wanted a real conversation about what is still possible. This is where the letter becomes deeply personal. They write, "I am not writing because I suddenly remembered you. I am writing because I realized I never truly stopped thinking about what we could have become." As this unfolds, clarity will come. There is a difference between missing someone and recognizing their importance, and your soulmate is beginning to understand that difference. They admit that they spent time convincing themselves that moving forward meant leaving everything behind. But eventually they discovered that moving forward can also mean finally facing what was left unresolved. And now, they are ready to do exactly that. The surprising part is that they are not waiting for some perfect sign anymore. They are considering taking an actual step toward communication. That is why the letter was so carefully written. Every word was chosen because they did not want emotion to speak for them alone. They wanted you to understand the reason behind their silence. They wanted you to know that the distance was not as simple as it appeared. And there is one sentence they wrote but nearly removed. If you still have even a small place in your heart for the conversation we never had, I hope you will let me speak. That sentence reveals everything. They are not asking you to forget the past. They are asking for the opportunity to explain it. Something huge is waiting for you, and it may begin with a conversation that neither of you expected to have again. But there is something even more surprising hidden inside the story, and this is where your soulmate's emotions become impossible to ignore. They admit that they have imagined what it would feel like to finally stand in front of you and say everything without hiding behind a screen or carefully chosen words. They imagine the first few seconds being awkward, perhaps quiet, because both of you would know that the conversation carries years of emotion behind it. Then they write, "I wonder if you would recognize the person I became while we were apart." That sentence carries a powerful meaning. They know you may have changed too. They know neither of you can simply return to an old version of yourselves. And yet, they believe there is something worth discovering in the people you have both become. This is the part many people would overlook, but it may be the most important part of the letter. Your soulmate is not asking to recreate the past. They are wondering whether the future could be different because both of you now understand things you did not understand before. They confess that there were moments when they wanted to tell you about their progress, their dreams, their small victories, and even their difficult days. But each time, they stopped because they did not know whether you would welcome their presence. That uncertainty became another reason for silence. Then they write something that completely changes the emotional direction of the letter. "I used to think I needed to know how you would respond before I could speak. Now I realize I simply need to be honest." That is the breakthrough. They are no longer trying to control the outcome. They are choosing sincerity. Stay with me for a moment, because there is another detail coming that makes this letter feel almost like a message arriving at exactly the right time. Your soulmate says they recently had a conversation with someone close to them, and during that conversation your name or memory somehow became part of the discussion. They did not expect it. They thought they had kept everything hidden. But that conversation forced them to admit something they had been avoiding. They still had feelings they had never properly explained. They still wondered what you were doing. They still remembered the connection. And when they finally admitted it aloud, they realized how much emotion had been sitting beneath the surface. If this story is resonating with you, share it with someone who understands the feeling of unfinished words, and subscribe because the next part of the letter reveals what your soulmate actually hopes will happen after you read these words. The answer is much softer, and much more powerful, than you may expect.